I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either gonna be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
And one of the countries that I visited, and I want to really mention this, is Armenia, where I have seen incredible stone circles, just wonderful. Dwarf Stonehenge make us just stand in awe and look at the way that these huge megalithic stones in what is called the Karahunj stone circle, they have certain holes drilled in them to align up with particular areas of the sky.
Whoa.
And an Armenian archaeoastronomer from that kind of data believes that the place called Karahunj is not just 2,000 or 3,000 years old, as most historians believe, but well over 12,000 years old. Because of the astronomical alignments, that the positions of the stars in the sky change very slowly down the ages, that the alignment to the solstices changes because there's a slow nod on the axis of the Earth, very, very slow, over tens of thousands of years, which means that if the sun rises at a certain point on the horizon on the summer solstice today, in 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 years' time, that point on the horizon will have changed. You wouldn't notice it in a lifetime. You wouldn't notice it in 10 lifetimes. But if you stay long enough, you'll note that actually the sun isn't rising in the same place on the horizon anymore. Well, actually, no, that's a second. That's the changing tilt of the Earth's axis.
Oh.
Which
kind of a wobble and a tilt.
Nods back. There's a wobble and there's a tilt, and then there's actually a tilt within the tilt. Okay. Yeah, this is the view. But the effect is, because the Earth is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars and which we observe the other celestial bodies such as the moon and the sun, the Earth is our viewing platform. If you change the orientation in space of that viewing platform, then the rising points of stars, the moon, the sun change, and the positions of the stars in the sky change. And it becomes a kind of language. Once you understand this, that it is universally available to us. The calculations can be done. We can do it. Anybody can buy computer software today, which will show you the ancient skies over any point on the Earth's surface at any time in the last 30,000 years. And what's involved in those computer simulations is simply calculations that had been done in previous centuries by astronomers, and we understand these processes. We can measure them and set them up. But there you have a regularity, a changing patterns in the sky. If you tie that into architecture on the ground, then actually you have a way free of all language of dating, of actually speaking. You can use this universal language of the stars and architecture to make a statement to the future. You can say that this particular time was very important to me, to our culture. It mattered to us. It mattered to us so much that we've created this huge monument to freeze the skies over a particular point.
Yeah, we're looking at some other
it's very complicated. So what you want is multiple locks. I mean, take the pyramids of Giza.
Right.
And here I cite the work of my close friend and colleague, Robert Boval, in particular in his book, The Orion Mystery. You take the three great pyramids of Giza and you look at the heavens overhead. And you also look at the religious system of the ancient Egyptians. What was important to them? What did they believe? You pretty soon discover that stars were incredibly important to them. Stars cover the inside of the ceilings of all tombs, all the pharaohs' tombs, for example. Monuments are lined up to particular places on the horizon where a star, perhaps it's Sirius, whose counterpart amongst the gods was the goddess Isis. Perhaps it's Orion, whose counterpart amongst the gods was the god Osiris. This is the thing. You have a mythology that speaks of entities who have who are clearly stated to be connected to particular asterisms, particular constellations. That's the first thing. Are the constellations that are being said to have a reflection upon the ground in architecture, were they significant to the culture concerned? Well, yes, absolutely. The constellation of Orion was of enormous significance to the ancient Egyptians. Therefore, it has to be a matter of interest that the three pyramids on the ground are laid out in a pattern that is temptingly similar to the pattern of the three belt stars of the constellation of Orion. Temptingly similar, but there's something else. Then you have shafts which run through the body of the Great Pyramid. There's a place called the King's Chamber high up in the Great Pyramid. It has a shaft in its north and south wall, which are about 8 inches high and 8 inches wide. And those shafts cut all the way through the body of the pyramid, and they come out on the south and north sides of the pyramid. You can actually, and it's been done in the past, you can drop a cannonball in at the outside entrance to those shafts, and that cannonball moments later will appear in the King's Chamber. The shafts are about 200 feet long. Okay, in the Queen's Chamber down below, there are also 2 shafts. These shafts do not exit on the outside of the pyramid, which creates a mystery of its own, of great interest, what is at the other end of those shafts. But they do have very definite alignments. And what Robert was really the first to show, some archaeoastronomers were onto this as well in the case of some of the stars, but what Robert was really the first to show is that in 2500 BC, the epoch in which Egyptologists say the pyramids were built, all of those 4 shafts that shoot up out of the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber all targeted very significant stars in the sky at that time. Like, for example, the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber targeted the star Sirius at exactly the moment that the star crosses the meridian. That's the north-south line that divides the sky above our heads. At exactly the moment that the star crosses that line, the shaft targets it, and you could fire a laser beam up and you'd hit that. In theory, you'd hit that star. The alignment is that great. So they're locking the pyramid in the epoch of 2500 BC to 4 significant stars in the sky. Another one of those stars is the lowest star of the belt of Orion. That tells us that this is a dating mechanism of some kind. And it can't be an accident that that's the case. And once you understand precession, you understand that these alignments will change. So it therefore becomes very interesting to discover that the orientation of the pyramids on the ground is which Robert argues are the terrestrial reflection of the 3 stars of the belt of Orion, that the orientation of the pyramids on the ground, because of precession, shifts very slowly down the ages. And you can see this clearly on any good sky map program, as you go back in time, you find that the constellation of Orion, at the moment it crosses the meridian, the same place that was targeting the star Sirius, at the moment it crosses the meridian, that the perfect alignment between the belt stars of Orion and the 3 great pyramids of Giza is not in 2500 BC, but in 10,500 BC, 8,000 years earlier. So we have a very interesting problem here. Either it's all coincidence, or the pyramids are monuments that speak both to the age of the ancient Egyptians, 2500 BC, and to a much earlier time. Well, that's, again, the third part of the lock, and Robert and I looked at this in depth together in our book called The Message of the Sphinx. And so we have the Giza Plateau, we have the 3 pyramids laid out on the ground in the pattern of the Belt of Orion in 10,500 BC. That's looking south. Now let's look east. Let's look due east. East, of course, is where the sun rises, but people who don't observe the sun don't realize that the sun tracks back and forth along the horizon during the solar year. It reaches its northernmost point on the summer solstice, 21st of June, and its southernmost point on the winter solstice, 21st of December. On the equinox, the day that night and day are of equal length, the sun rises directly perfectly due east. That's actually how you define an equinox, because the sun is rising perfectly due east. And looking at it is the Sphinx, aligned, gazing directly, perfectly at the point of sunrise. Now we have to consider what's behind the sun then. What is the constellation of the zodiac that the sun is rising in? Because that's what the zodiac is. It's a group of constellations that by chance the sun passes through during the course of the year. But the constellation that the sun rises against the background of is also affected by precession, the wobble on the axis of the Earth, and that changes. You have roughly 2,160 years in each house of the zodiac. For the last 2,160 years, we've been in Pisces. As I often say, it's not an accident that the early Christians used the fish as their symbol. Before that, it was the constellation of Aries, the ram. Rams were incredibly important in the years from 2000 down to the time of Christ. Just look at the biblical stories. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the Great Sphinx is a lion, admittedly with a human head, but that head is rather small, and we think that the head almost certainly was recarved in a later time. Probably the whole statue was originally a lion, crouching there on the horizon, gazing due east at the rising sun on the equinox and at the constellation behind the sun. And that constellation is, in 10,500 BC, the constellation of Leo. As above, so below. Leo speaking to the Sphinx, Orion speaking to the pyramids, locking in to a date that is far before any civilization began. And I know I'm on a long, but just at that point, when the Egyptologists say, well, it's impossible for there to be any thing like a civilization at Giza 12,500 years ago, just when they're very happy saying that, and they're telling us that no other monument can be found anywhere in the world which is 12,500 years old on this scale, lo and behold, up pops Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe in the area of Turkey that, by the way, was once historic Armenia. Göbekli Tepe pops up. It's dated by the German Archaeological Institute. They discovered that this huge complex of stone circles has been deliberately buried 10,000 years ago, and the carbon dating, because you can't date stones, you have to date organic materials. The carbon dating of organic materials found with those stone circles puts their age back to 12,000 years and more. It was like Christmas. It was like Christmas. It was like a gift. I don't want to. I have to confess. I mean, we all have egos.
Of course.
I have to confess that it was a nice moment for me when the New Scientist magazine in Britain, which years ago, back in the 90s, when I published Fingerprints of the Gods, was amongst the magazines that attacked my work as quote-unquote pseudoscientific and all of. I don't know how my work can be pseudoscientific because I don't claim to be a scientist. I'm a fucking journalist, you know. I'm not a scientist. How can I be a pseudoscientist?
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Yeah. So anyway, New Scientist magazine, back in the 1990s, was saying that I was wrong. Well, the basic message of Fingerprints of the Gods is history is much older and much more mysterious than we've been told. So it was great in October 2013 when New Scientist magazine came out with a headline saying history is much older and more mysterious than we thought. In my next,
we're sorry, dude.
In my next life,
We were fucking with you.
but there was Göbekli Tepe, and that's what changes everything. And by the way, I'll just say, I guess we may be running out of time, but I'll just say, are we good?
Yeah.
I just say also Indonesia, which is the other place that my wife Santa and I have done a lot of research in the last 6 or 7 months, has been found what was thought to be a 2,500-year-old site on top of a hill, a site made of blocks of columnar basalt, which forms naturally, but which can be used as a construction medium. Okay. It's called Gunung Padang, and on the top of a hill in a series of terraces is a rather extraordinary monument thought to be about 2,500 years old, made of these blocks of columnar basalt. No really thorough research was ever done by archaeologists. A little bit of trenching down to about half a meter in depth was done, and some carbon was brought up and dated. But really the site, it was just kind of taken for granted that it was 2,500 years old. Along comes Danny Natawajija, who is a Caltech-trained PhD geologist working out of the city of Bandung in a government agency of the Indonesian government. In fact, he particularly focuses on earthquakes. Earthquakes are his thing. He comes along and he's intrigued by Gunung Padang First of all, that there's old traditions about it being a sacred place. It seemed to go back a very, very, very long way. And he starts to look at it as a geologist. And what he realizes, suddenly it comes to him, he's not looking at a natural hill. He's looking at a pyramid, on top of which is this relatively recent monument. But somebody built a pyramid there. So he begins work on this. It's like a hill, but inside it's a man-made structure. That was Danny's intuition, but then he had to prove it. So he put together a team, and they did a huge amount of remote sensing work and some core drilling down to depths of about 15 meters into the top of the hill. And what they discovered was incredibly tempting. It supports Danny's intuition that we are looking at a man-made pyramid here. It produces dates that go back as much as 26,000 years, right into the last ice age, and the remote sensing equipment shows rather regular cavities inside the monument, which look like chambers of some kind. Well, naturally, Danny and his team were stopped working for quite a long while by the archaeological establishment in Indonesia, who said, we know that this structure is 2,500 years old, and there's no need for any further research on it, and it just disturbs the local villagers and go away. And so they lobbied and they had him stopped. But Danny took it to the highest level. He got the support of the Indonesian government, and 2.5 weeks ago, they started work thoroughly excavating. And again, I can't summon up a map magically, but if I were to do so, consider Indonesia, which is a long string of islands today. But if you go back 12,500 years ago, that long string of islands is joined to a gigantic mainland, a huge, ice age continent, because sea level is hundreds of feet lower. And therefore, Indonesia becomes actually quite a plausible place for some sort of hall of records, some sort of time capsule, because Göbekli Tepe is also a time capsule.
You're going, whoa.
There's interesting stuff happening in the world. I've been lucky to spend some time exploring this. I am writing a sequel to my best-known book, undoubtedly, is Fingerprints of the Gods, the evidence for Earth's lost civilization. 1995, and now, after being scorned and put down by the archaeological establishment, there is enough new evidence out there for me to produce a whole other book. There's a whole other story to tell. Not an update of Fingerprints of the Gods, but a new book, which looks than the rest of Stonehenge. That's the thing, you see. That's why archaeologists need to be a little more humble, because the next turn of the spade can change everything, completely alter the story, and we should always remain open to that. Yeah. That piece of stone is seen by American archaeologists in the 1950s, and they decide not to look at it because it's so finely done that they think it belongs to the Ottoman period within the last 400 or 500 years. Actually, it turns out to be 12,000 years old. Yeah, well, it's cool. Got the German Archaeological Institute later. Unfortunately, they've stuck a hideous roof over the top of Göbekli. Oh, it's so... Look, it was 19 years it was exposed to the sun. It was out there. They began the excavations in 1996, and it's fine. And now that they've finished the excavations, they decide that in that particular area, they're excavating other areas, they decide to stick this horrendous roof over it, which cuts out the light, makes it impossible to see the stone pillars. The roof is badly built, so there are platforms built inside it on which huge heaps of stones have been piled up. That's to keep the roof on if there's any high winds. So suddenly the possibility of any kind of magical experience at the world's most intriguing and mysterious ancient site is completely written off by this hideous piece of so-called protective architecture, which in my view is just the worst kind of vandalism. I'm really offended by it. I was in Göbekli Tepe in 2013. I went back again this year. And I was just horrified. It made me feel physically sick to see what had been done to it. I think it's a kind of, in this case, I think it's a kind of possession. This is ours.
Really?
We've seen it. We, the experts, we, the authorities.
Oh,
Nobody else will
weird.
really get to form an opinion about it, because we're going to damage its appearance so much in protecting it that it'll lose its essential mystery. Yeah, and this is being done at archaeological sites around the world. It's been done at Menidra and Hagarim in Malta, which have profound astronomical alignments. You stick a fucking great dome over the top of it. It's being done at Rosslyn Chapel in Edinburgh. We're doing everything, and the worst vandals are often the authorities, those who are Those who are in control. No, he's not. He did, but all the charges were dropped. Yeah. He's a big front man for Egypt. No, he's not running everything, but he's got an official position in relation to the promotion of tourism. By the way, my first trip to Göbekli Tepe, Robert Schock and I traveled together. There was some filming, yeah. But we were at Göbekli Tepe in December. Sorry, not Göbekli Tepe, at Gunung Padang in Indonesia. Schock and I were there in December 2013, and then I went back again with. His impression was very much that this is an intriguing site. He looked at the remote. You see, as a geologist, he can understand what remote scanning paperwork looks like, and he looked at what Danny's team had produced and said, "This is absolutely fascinating. It really deserves further research," and that's now what it's getting. Fortunately, not many people who go to Chichen Itza and see the temple of Kukulkan there, the pyramid of Kukulkan, which is the famous monument of Chichen Itza. Not many people realize that there's another pyramid inside it, which is inside it. There's a little door at the bottom of the northern stairway, and I don't think it can be done now. The place has been so tightly controlled. I don't think people are even allowed to climb the pyramid of Kukulkan. I believe that stopped in the last 2 or 3 years. I was there. No, it may be a little longer. The last time I was there was in 2010, and then it was stopped. I don't know. There may be all kind of arguments, but the fact is, it was possible to climb it.
I did
back in the 90s. Anyway, inside it is a whole second pyramid. The pyramid that we see has been built on top of an earlier one, and there's a passageway that leads up to the top of it, and there's an altar, and there's a figure of a puma or a jaguar inside. It's a very spooky place.
Wow.
One of the most cave diving is one of the most dangerous things.
Fuck that.
No. Because I'll tell you why. Because the entrance passage can be long and winding. There can be several alternative routes through it, and it's often heavily laden with silt, with sediment. If the diver is not very experienced, or if the diver panics and starts thrashing around, that silt gets thrown up into the water and completely fills the water so that you can't see your hand in front of your face, and suddenly you're a mile in, 100 feet deep, and blind. Yes. Oh, yes. You're done for. Unless you can find your way, unless by some miracle you can find your way through that fog. But the very first thing, if you're going to do that you have to do is you have to calm your mind. Well, I've written Entangled, which is a whole other story.
Right.
And then I've written Volume 1 and Volume 2 of War God. The first volume was War God Knights of the Witch. It was published in 2013. There was a big support and take-up from your audience, which I'm extremely grateful for. Thank you. And I made an offer at that time on your show where I said that if people wrote to me at a particular address, which is wargoddedications@gmail.com, and sent me their own address and showed me that they'd pre-ordered the book, I would send them a signed, dedicated book plate. In other words, I would sign a label, I would dedicate it to them, I would send it to them. Little did I know that nearly 5,000 people would ask for those signed, dedicated book plates. It became a massive labor of love for both myself and my wife, Santha. She's doing the enveloping, I'm dealing with the correspondence, signing the book plates. We're going to the post office, we're spending thousands of pounds on postage, but it was great. It was a fantastic thing, and it helped the book to get noticed, because there was great skepticism about buying a second volume from my publishers unless the first volume worked. And the first volume worked enough for me to be commissioned to write Volume 2 of War God, which is called War God Return of the Plumed Serpent, and that is published on the 9th of October. And I'm making the same special offer, very limited, to you read, but it's going to be a bit different. First off, if you go to my website, go to www.grahamhancock.com and go to the War God page. It's very easy to get there. Scroll down at the bottom of the page that shows the covers of all the editions, and you will find a statement there, and that is that if people write to me, if people pre-order, first of all, they have to pre-order, either order Volume 1 or pre-order Volume 2. Amazon don't take your money until they actually send the book, and I've got the links to Amazon.com there. I will, when I finish my travels, and I'm going to be on the road until the 27th of October, but during November, I will send out those book plates again. But what I can't do this time is I can't get into personal correspondence with people. It was very interesting. It was very touching and heartwarming thing that so many people wrote to me, and so many of them, I wanted to speak back to them. It's very cold, to receive a letter and not to reply.
Right.
So I did, but the problem this year is that I've got to write the sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods, and I'd really need to start that during November because my research travels will be over at that point. I've got to write that, and I can't spend 2 months or 3 months corresponding in detail. So my offer is, write to me. Show me that you've bought the book or pre-ordered volume 2. And above all, please give me your postal address, because you can't imagine how many times people write to me asking for the book plates and don't give me their postal address. Please give me your postal address. And when I get back from my travels, I will sign the book plates. I will send you a signed book plate, which is simply a label that you can stick inside your copy of the book. And that, if that results in a bit more uptake for War God 2, it'll be good for me, because it's very difficult to start a sort of new career as a novelist at the age of 64. I love it. I love writing novels, and I love this is why I was talking about warriors earlier. I love getting into the spirit of the warrior. I don't know why. It's fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating. What would drive a man like Cortez to take 490 men and face them against the might of the Aztec Empire? Hundreds of thousands of men under arms who will kill you in the most awful way if they catch you. What kind of will does it take to do that? And it's been interesting for me to get inside the heads of these people, and also to consider, because I'm interested in them, supernatural elements. Were they being misled by demonic forces in some way? That's something that I examine there. So I love doing it, but I'm known as a nonfiction author, and that's mainly what I do. People buy nonfiction because they're interested in the subject very often. People buy a novelist because they trust that novelist and know that his next book will be good. And I need to build that readership. For a long time, I didn't believe in any spiritual element to life. I didn't see any of that at all. It was only really when and this is where my critics will say, well, Hancock's gone nuts, It was only really when I started drinking ayahuasca in 2003. I suppose for a decade before that, I'd been immersed in the ancient Egyptian texts. And the ancient Egyptians are all about the quest for immortal life. They're all about how you live this life to continue on as a spirit, and ultimately to live the life of millions of years. And they very clearly indicate that dark forces are at work in the universe which can mislead us, as well as there are light and positive forces that we can choose to follow, which will lead us into very nurturing and worthwhile and excellent directions. All those influences are there. So that's there in ancient Egypt. Then I start drinking ayahuasca in 2003, and I encounter seamlessly convincing parallel realms inhabited by intelligent beings, some of whom seem very dark and dangerous, and some of whom are filled with light and joy and exercise the power of healing. Now, I absolutely accept that all of this could be a projection or a creation of my own mind, that there is no exterior reality to it whatsoever. It's just that's all there is. But I don't think it's that way. I think that what happens in a deeply altered state of consciousness is that we retune the receiver wavelength of the brain and encounter other levels of reality that are normally closed off to our senses. And the first thing I would say I know that a number of people who've worked with psychedelics in depth haven't come to that conclusion. I know that. But the conclusion that I come to, the little offering that I bring to the table and that many others have brought, is that there is a separate freestanding reality of some kind which we don't fully understand yet, and that in altered states of consciousness we can interact with that reality. That's the view that I have. Now, in that reality are spiritual forces, some of which seem to eat fear and energy and dark energy. They seem to thrive on anything that's miserable or wicked or cruel or thoughtless or vile about humanity. And at the other side of it are entities that glow with light and love, and that seek to show us how we may bring to light that divine spark within us, to go back to the Gnostic idea. Those you encounter in a very direct way in the ayahuasca journey, because unlike, you do encounter them in the DMT journey too, they're not quite the same, but unlike DMT, ayahuasca allows time for really processing and thinking through what you're experiencing. It's unfolding over 4 hours, not 4 or 5 minutes, and that is a huge effect, and it had a huge effect on me. And I'm not adamant about this. I accept I could be fantasizing it all. It's interesting that other people encounter pretty much the same beings and the same sort of drive to do something better than they've done before. It's interesting that there's that transpersonal side of it. I choose to believe that there are freestanding parallel dimensions and that we are encountering them in altered states of consciousness, and that therefore there's interesting scientific work to be done, because in theory we could actually begin the targeted exploration of those dimensions by using volunteers and psychedelics. I choose to believe that that's what's going on. I could be completely wrong. It could just be the majesty of the human mind and we just invent all these. There isn't a compelling argument. There isn't a compelling argument. There's a reference frame. And the reference frame, and this is again where I got myself into so much trouble with TED, the reference frame is the reference frame of materialist science. And that reference frame says that all consciousness is a kind of accidental epiphenomenon of brain activity. There's actually no reality to consciousness. That is not something that's been proven scientifically and experimentally. It is just the way that a large and influential group of scientists see the world, that everything can be reduced to material causes. So the changes in brain activity that accompany visions, you can measure, you can observe those changes on an MRI scanner. Those changes in brain activity are the experience you're having, according to this reference frame. Your experience can just be reduced to that, and there's nothing else to it. But that's not a fact. That is a philosophical view about how reality works. We don't know for sure. It could easily be the other way around, that the brain activity is simply necessary in order for us to see something that was always there, but that was normally closed off to our senses. Well, that is the materialist reductionist view, but it's just that and nothing more. But there's a whole other view on it. Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico, you're very familiar with his work because you presented the spirit molecule.
Yes.
Rick Strassman does entertain the possibility that what is going on is not merely in and of our brains, but does represent stable, freestanding dimensions of reality. We have no facts in this, but we have an incredibly intriguing area to inquire into, you know. But it's bad science. It's bad science to present it as fact when it isn't. I many times given this very simple analogy of the telescope, which I think explains the logical problem in the materialist view. If you want to look at a distant star with your telescope, you're going to point it at the right area of the sky, first of all, and then you're going to focus it. And as you focus it, physical changes will take place in the relationship between the lenses inside the barrel of the telescope. Yeah?
Right.
Eventually the star will come into view and you can see it clearly. You'd be completely wrong to say that the star is the physical changes inside the barrel of the telescope. Those physical changes have simply allowed you to see the star. That was another story. We stayed down for about 20-25 minutes. We then had to come up. We'd been working quite hard at depth, and you get through your air. But what we hadn't done was recce the exit point. And when we surfaced in this heavy swell, it was extremely difficult to get out of the sea. The rocks came down quite steep and sheer, and it was bad. But anyway, here I am to tell the tale, an older and wiser man. Or has happened before. That's also part of the new research that I'm doing. And I'm about to do a trip with Randall Carlson. Who's been, Randall was so far ahead of the curve in recognizing that the gigantic flooding that came off the North American ice cap wasn't just caused by what I used to think it was caused by, which is that lakes of meltwater develop on the surface of the ice cap, and finally the ice dam breaks and the meltwater pours out. Randall had been pointing out for years that the water flows were much too radical for that. Something much bigger had to be involved. So he was well ahead of the evidence when scientists began to realize that the North American ice cap had been hit by a comet 12,980 years ago. set in motion the epoch that geologists call the Younger Dryas. So Randall is a great expert in this area. My wife Santha's traveling with us as well, and a friend of Randall's who's worked with him for many years called Bradley, and we're going to do a road trip from Portland, Oregon, all the way to Minneapolis, following it's about 2,000 miles, I believe, following the southern edge of the former ice cap. And Randall's going to show us the scars and tears on the landscape of what happened when that ice cap was instantly liquidized by a comet impact, and huge tidal waves of water roared down off it across the lands. We're going to see that in detail with Randall. Really looking forward to doing that. Also, the first time I've ever crossed, well, most of America by road. I've always wanted to do that. I know. Anyway, it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to this. My wife is going to take loads and loads of pictures, and we're going to go up in an airplane a few times and look at the land underneath us, and it's going to be a great, exciting research trip. And it's the last research trip for this sequel that I'm writing, The Fingerprints. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's precisely, that has finally settled it.
Yeah.
Any scientists who were attempting to argue that there wasn't a comet impact, now, with all the evidence that's come in over the last 5 or 6 years, is just settled by the nanodiamonds, scattered in a huge swathe all over the world, which are a sure chemical imprint of a massive comet impact. And they know a lot about it now. It's really very, very clear. And this was an episode that changed the world. It killed off many of the megafauna that we've all heard of, the mammoths, the woody rhinos, and so on and so forth. And it got rid of what was called the Clovis culture, hunter-gatherer culture in the United States. And I think it got rid of a whole civilization that we've only remembered in myth and memory. At least that's the line that I'm investigating. It was massive in America, but the effect was everywhere. Both impacts, because this comet broke up into fragments like Shoemaker-Levy 9, both impacts, but also, very important, the gigantic cloud of dust that's thrown up into the upper atmosphere, which then, so you have this immediate reaction of flooding as the comet liquidizes part of the North American ice cap, and then a huge dust plume is up in the air all over the world, and the whole Earth is shrouded in dust cooled because it's reflecting back the sun's rays. So we go into this 1,300, 1,400 year period called the Younger Dryas, where the Earth gets incredibly cold, even though previously it had been coming out of the Ice Age. It's truly a gigantic event. And then, weirdly, all our history, everything we think of as our past, begins at the end of the Younger Dryas. Kicks in 12,980 years ago, ends 11,600 years ago. The Earth begins to warm up again, and everything we know about ourselves, or can claim we know, unfolds in that last 11,600 years. And the period before the Younger Dryas, we really blank on so much of it. The NASA photographs of I think they call it the black diamond, the Earth at night, okay? What you see is certain areas of the world are brightly lit up. Europe, North America, for example. On the other hand, Africa and large parts of South America are dark because there's no electrification in those areas. And those photographs are often taken to speak of our achievement. Look how we can light up the planet like a Christmas tree so that it can be viewed from space. But I would say it also says another thing, that if we were to confront again the same sort of cataclysm that hit the Earth 12,980 years ago, then the people who would survive and carry the human story forward would be those very people who live in the dark areas, the areas that aren't electrified. And we who live in the glowing lights that show up on those NASA photographs, who've become so specialized, who most of us are unable even to know how to plant a vegetable or hunt an animal, we're the ones who would be gone, and the whole order of the world would be reversed.
Whoa.
Because they're fine. They'd be absolutely fine. They know how to survive, They know how to do it. So again, I think the message of this is we shouldn't be arrogant and complacent in the achievements of our civilization. We have done wonderful and amazing things as well as terrible things, but we shouldn't be arrogant or complacent about it. We should recognize it's all very fragile. It can be taken away from us at any time. We can take it away from ourselves. It's why I'm calling the book Magicians of the Gods, because there's something magical, something about it that we would call magic, but perhaps was just another form of science. Whole faction who'll look for the most boring, meaningless But the fact that there are large groups of people whose mission is to look for the most boring rather than the most extraordinary possibility, it's good. That's how we have balance in our society. We do need to look with a skeptical eye and say that there could be mundane explanations for this. But we also need to keep a tiny fraction of our research effort, perhaps a very small fraction indeed,
to exploring
alternative ideas. Because if they do come out right, they change everything in the way that the mundane things don't. And it's really worthwhile. And the only thing understand why I've been subjected to so much criticism, and I welcome it. I've learnt a great deal from that criticism. But is it wise for us to live in a society which is hostile to the exploration of extraordinary possibilities? Shouldn't we actually protect that and make that something which we encourage those who wish to do so in our society to do, just on the off chance that they might come up with something utterly world-changing? Million tons, blocks of 50 to 70 tons, roofing the king's chamber, elevated to heights of 300 feet above the ground, almost perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west within a fraction of a single degree. You don't know how to exercise the majestic and incredible power of your mind. And if we're running out of time, can I say again?
Yes, please.
Because I am a budding novelist.
Please,
if anybody out there would like to take me up on this offer, just go to grahamhancock.com, go to the War God page, which you'll find easily, scroll down and see what to write to me. But I have to repeat again, I will send you the book plates, but I can't correspond. And it will be November before I'm in a position to send the book plates, because I'm on the road continuously until the 27th. I think it'll probably be the last one. By the way, there's chapters to read free online on the War God page as well.
Oh, beautiful.
So I'm not asking people to buy sight unseen. They can. That's what I'd like to do in fingerprints, was to bring together people like John Anthony West, who brought Robert Schoch to this field, like Robert Boval, like Randon Rose Flemath. A lot of researchers were working in the field and coming up with extraordinary information. And part of what I did in that book was to bring all that information together into a kind of synthesis, I suppose. So the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek. There's undoubtedly a Roman temple there, okay? And that Roman temple dates from the known historical period, some 200-300 years after Christ. It's the Roman Temple of Jupiter, and it's very extraordinary, but it stands on these huge foundations. There's a group of stones, three stones, called the Trilithion, which are each weighing 840 tons. 840 tons. And they are lifted to 20 feet above the ground and built into a wall. I've sat on top of one of those stones. I've been down underneath it and looked up at it. To 840-ton stones. This is a gigantic achievement. Now, the Orthodox view is that the Romans did everything, that they built those foundations and they built the temple. I think, and many researchers who've studied them in this field agree with me on this, that actually the Romans found a much more ancient site, which was just extraordinarily megalithic, gigantic stones, and they built their temple on top of it. And later historians have simply given the whole thing to the Romans without considering what was going on there. And part of the reason I think that is because of these stones that are still in the quarry, which I was trying to, I don't know if it showed up on the screen. I got it. You got it. I'm trying to show it, I'm trying to show it just now. These stones stood in the quarry, okay? Now, so what the historians say is that the Romans, they found they could move the 840-ton stones. That's what it is.
1 million.
So here's the thing. Those are the 840-ton blocks in the walls, in the foundation of the temple. Then we go to the quarry and we find this humongous thing, which weighs over 1,000 tons. And there's another one on the other side of the road, which weighs 1,200 tons. So here's the theory, okay? The Romans found they could move the 840-ton blocks, and they did. This is the Orthodox theory, and then they built their temple on top of it. But they found they couldn't move these 1,000 or 1,200 plus ton blocks. And by the way, this one is completely separated from the bedrock out of which it's been cut. They couldn't move them, so they left them in the quarry. I think that actually proves that the Romans didn't create the 840-ton megalith, because if the Romans had known that these gigantic blocks if they had cut the blocks, if they had cut them themselves, which we must say they did, if we are saying that the Romans were responsible for these megaliths. If the Romans had cut these blocks themselves, they knew they were there, And the very first thing they would have used for the smaller blocks that they put into place in the Temple of Jupiter was these large blocks. They would have sliced them up like a loaf of bread into smaller blocks and moved those over to the temples. The fact that these huge megaliths still stand in the quarry suggests to me that they were buried when the Romans came to that site, because otherwise it would have been the very first thing they would have used for quarrying smaller blocks, that they were buried and that the Romans found an existing prehistoric megalithic platform, and on top of it, they built their Temple of Jupiter. Well, let's consider an average vehicle, which might weigh. So it's about 2 tons, right? Is that about the weight of an average vehicle? So 2 tons, divide 1,000 by that. So you're looking at 500 family-sized cars in a 1,000-ton block. Now, there's 3 blocks of 840 tons each. So closely that you can't slip a sheet of paper between them. I mean, they've not been just roughly levered into place. They've been set down with perfect precision.
Yeah, we know
someone did that, and there are plenty of people arguing that the Romans did it. I feel, along with other researchers who've approached this subject, I want to look at alternative possibilities for what these megaliths are all about, and that's one of the things I've been doing for the last year, is traveling around the world, looking. I feel so lucky to have the opportunity to do this.
I would
looking
imagine.
at just amazing archaeological sites.
Spotify, it's Jay Shetty. Are you one of those media strategy people? Scrolling through spreadsheets, searching for an audience that pays twice as much attention to your ads than they do on social? Let me introduce you to Fans. And they're here with me on Spotify. Trust me, I know Fans. They don't skip, they stay for hours. They don't move on, they manifest. They're not a demographic group, they're fans.
Spotify advertising. You're among fans.